The Speyerbach is a left tributary of the Rhine in the Palatinate part of Rhineland-Palatinate. In Speyer, the river split into Gießhübelbach and Woogbach. The Woogbach changes its name to Nonnenbach, then flows into Gießhübelbach shortly before the latter flows into the Rhine. Importance: although only classified as a river of the third rank under German river classification system, the Speyerbach is the largest river of the anterior Palatinate. It is 60 kilometers long. Its catchment area is 596 square kilometers. Its discharge varies between 1 and 5 cubic meters per second. In extreme weather conditions with heavy rain in a short time, the discharge may be much higher. The highest peak was 19.5 cubic meters per second on the 25th of May 1978. Course: the nominal source of the Speyerbach is located near the hamlet of Speyerbach in the municipality of Elmstein, in the middle of the Palatinate forest, east of the Palatine watershed. It has an elevation of 296 meters (AMSL), the surrounding Frankenwide hills climbing up to 609 meters in height. Soon after its nominal source, it is joined by the much larger Nonnenbach, which rises at the Hussars Fountain, 5 kilometers further south, on the Esskopf, at an elevation of 460 meters. So, hydrologically speaking, the Hussars Fountain is the true source of Speyerbach. For the Speyerbach winds through the narrow Elmstein Valley, flowing east at first, then northeast, flowing past the main village of Elmstein. Above the valley, the ruins of 4 castles are lined in a row. Erfenstein Castle and Spangenberg Castle are well known from the legend of the Leather Bridge. About 5 kilometers downstream from Elmstein, the Helmbach flows into the Speyerbach at the hamlet of the same name. Below Frankenach, where the broader Lambrecht Valley begins, the Speyerbach takes from the left's most important water supplier, the nearly 20-kilometer-long Hochspeyerbach, and changes its direction to the southeast. The small town of Lambrecht spreads on both sides of the river. The Speyerbach breaks the eastern ridge of the Palatinate forest shortly before Neustadt an der Weinstraße. The ridge is about 300 meters above the river. On the left, above the valley, of the ruins of Wolfsburg Castle and Winsingen Castle, on the site where Harte Castle was later erected. About 3 kilometers to the right of the valley is Hambach Castle, the symbol of the German democracy movement, which had an early peak with the Hambach Festival of 1832. In Neustadt an der Weinstraße, the Rheinbach splits off to the left at the Winsinger Wasserscheide, carrying 1/3 of the water. The Speyerbach then flows through a narrow valley in the hill country of the German wine route, both sides of the valley aligned with vineyards. It then continues through the upper Rhine Valley, in a southeasterly direction. In Speyerdorf the Ranchgraben splits off to the left. Here, the Speyerbach flows through the municipalities of Hanhofen and Dudenhofen. At the Hanhofer Wasserscheide, the Mühlberggraben joins from the right, and the Woogbach split off on the left, taking half the water. 2 more tributaries join in the next 3 kilometers, the Modenbach and the Hainbach. In Speyer, the Woogbach rejoins, and then the Speyerbach flows into the Rhine in the port of Speyer, at Rhine kilometer mark 400.3. Tributaries: Erlenbach, 4.9 kilometers. Schwarzenbach, 3.8 kilometers. Enkenbach, 2.6 kilometers. Muckentalbach, 0.9 kilometers. Weltersbach, 2.8 kilometers. Osselbach, 2.1 kilometers. Legelbach, 4.2 kilometers. Mollbach, 1.1 kilometers. Hasselbach, 3.2 kilometers. Helmbach, 11.0 kilometers. Argenbach, 5.5 kilometers. Breidenbach, 6.7 kilometers. Erfensteiner Talbach, 1.5 kilometers. Hollisk-Talbach line, 2.7 km. East-Thalbach, 4.4 km. Hoch-Speyerbach, 21.3 km. Lerbach, 2.0 km. Schlangentalbach, 3.8 km. Heidenbrunn-Talbach, 4.1 km. Kaltenbrunn-Talbach, 6.6 km. Raybach, 29.0 km. Bergergraben. History. In the past, the Speyerbach was an important freight transport route for timber. Transportation was done by drifting of logs or timber up to about 1.40 meters long. The water discharge was too low for rafts made of tree trunks. The timber was collected before being left in artificial ponds called Woogen or Klausen, to be drifted in spring, as the snow melt began. The timing was crucial, because during the drifting season, the watermills, sawmills and ironworks could not be operated and mill workers had to be paid compensation. In an account from 1832, head teacher W. Hage reported the presence, in Elmstein Valley alone, of 3 mills, 5 sawmills, 1 forge and 1 paper mill, all of which the drifters had to take into account. Drifting on the Speyerbach was regulated by a drifting order of 1320, which decreed that drifting had to be completed on St. George's Day. After the Palatinate had come under Bavarian rule in 1816, drifting on the Speyerbach and other rivers was expanded. In 1822, a drifting office was opened in Neustadt, when in 1852 a drifting master's office was established in Elmstein. The Neustadt had more than 140 kilometers of drifting waters. From 1882 onwards, drifting was gradually abandoned. On the Speyerbach, drifting was practiced until 1902, but only above Frankenau. The last drift contained 6,193 sterei of timber. The middle and lower reaches of today's Speyerbach are largely the product of human intervention, both in terms of its course and its being canalized. The meanders that existed during the Spanish Succession War led to the undoing of both French and Imperial troops during the Battle of Speyerbach in September 1703. The elimination of the former meanders causes frequent floods, because overflow areas are now missing. In built-up areas, the aesthetics of the river suffered from the canalization and covering. In Neustadt, both the Speyerbach and the Raybach have largely disappeared from view during the second half of the 20th century. In the first decade of the 21st century, the rivers were partially restored, in order to form a green corridor. The project was completed in June 2010, at a cost of €2.7 million, most of which was paid by the state of Rhine and Palatinate. The lower reaches of the Speyerbach, east of Neustadt, flowing southeast to Speyer, were probably created by the Romans to transport timber from the Palatinate forest Novio Magus Nemetum, the Germanic precursor of Speyer. The water level in this section is up to 3 meters above the surrounding terrain. Previously, it probably followed a more northerly course, south of Hasselach and then along the course of the current Ranchgraben, taking up the Raybach near Limburgerhof-Rehut and flowing into the Rhine between Altrincham and Ludwigshafen. The distributaries Raybach and Woogbach are both artificial. They were created in the late Middle Ages. Tourist attractions. Castles. The ruins of Elmstein Castle, above Elmstein on the southwestern edge of the 458-meter-high Castle Hill, is privately owned and can only be viewed from the outside. In the hamlet of Breitenstein of the ruins of Breitenstein Castle, just over 1 kilometer down the Speyerbach from the hamlet of Erfenstein, and on the left the ruins of Erfenstein Castle, on the right those of Spangenberg Castle. Forest Service Museum. The Forestry Museum Elmstein, situated in the house of Heinrich Haag, the last blacksmith, provides the public since 1990 with information about working in the forest, including drifting on the Speyerbach drift path. Otto Varg, a retired ranger, has created the drift path Elmstein. It has large information panels and starts in the Appenthal part of Elmstein. Museum Railway Line. The Cuckoo Railway, a heritage railway line, runs historic steam locomotives and carriages between Neustadt and Elmstein. The reactivated part of the track from Lambrecht to Elmstein follows the Speyerbach and just under 13 kilometers long. Mills. The Frohnmüller Mill on Speyerbach between Hasselach and the Neustadt district of Geinsheim is in working order. It has a green restaurant and a weeping willow as a green monument. The Aumüller Mill between Hasselach and Hanhofen has a water wheel in working order, and a very good restaurant. Leisure facilities. Near the Speyerbach, a holiday park and a pony farm with a stud farm. Economy and infrastructure. Economy, because the raw material and a supply of energy were available next to each other. Large paper mills developed in Lambrecht Valley in the 19th century. Because this was very labor-intensive work, they were at the time very important for the regional labor market. The paper mills still exist today, although technological progress has led to job cuts. Transport. Federal Road B39 Frankenstein, Neustadt, Speyer and the Palatinate Ludwigsbahn railroad line between Saarbrücken and Mannheim run side by side through Lambrecht Valley. The previously abandoned Cuckoo Railway line from Lambrecht to Elmstein was reactivated in 1984.